This is Mommying While Muslim, recorded live and unedited. Watch as Zeba and Uzma record their podcast, see their reactions, and find out for yourself what all the buzz is about.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Mommyingwhilemuslim podcast. This is Uzma Jaffrey, still flying solo to support Zeba in her endeavors to support her kids this summer, because she did the same for me at the beginning. So we take care of each other on this podcast. A lot of you have been asking about our Morocco trip, trying to get details about how to get signed up for the next one, find out our experiences, our ratings and reviews. We probably will end up doing some kind of a collaboration with Sisters Getaway Official so that you get more information that you need. There's just too many messages, guys, for us to respond to each one. We're so sorry. We're usually good about it, but man, we are just tired. And being at a getaway where it was a true getaway without Wi-Fi, without AC, it makes you really value the things that you don't usually value. So I think for Zeba, the things that she missed most, of course, our children we missed the most. But then outside of that, for her, it was AC. And for me, it was my toilet. I think toilets are highly underrated in America. And I encourage everybody to invest in a very good one that you can hopefully flush bricks down, because they don't have that overseas. So yeah, I really missed my toilet. And as much as I was happy to cuddle with my babies, I almost want to say alhamdulillah every time I use my toilet, but I know not to say alhamdulillah while on the toilet. So yeah, it's the little things, guys, but the toilet, I wish I could now pack it with me and take it. Like, that should be an essential item. I've got to figure this out. If anybody has any ideas on how to do that, let me know. It's Uzma at mommyingwhilemuslim.com. So moving on, it is the end of July. We are super excited for that because both Zeba and I have anniversaries around this time. We are really excited, and unfortunately, I won't be celebrating with my husband because he's working, and I'll probably be out of town again, but super excited to have made it this far, and this far into the summer without dying, because we've been exposed to heat, and more heat, and we're still here. Alhamdulillah. Good things. Our next guest, Rishma Govani, at the end of July, is gracing us. She is a decorated media maven with over 2 decades of experience in the public relations and communications field. Our kind of gal. She serves as the director of communications for Global News and Chorus Radio in Canada, our cousin just across the border. And she is a children's book author. This is really important because we found the book before we found her. And we thought we got to find her. So did a lot of researching. You know me in internet stalking. Did it, found her, and here she is. She experienced early widowhood. And as a result, Rishma had to add sole parenting as a role also to her resume, sole parenting to 2 young children. That is one of the many hats she wears, one of the many job titles she now holds, unfortunately, but maybe fortunately we'll let her describe that to us in further detail. We're taking a deep breath before this heavy episode, so if you need to take a break before we get started, totally get it. Put us on pause and come back later. In the meantime, Assalamu alaikum and welcome, Rishma.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me here today. I'm already starting to weep a bit, so it'll be a nice cathartic release, hopefully, during this conversation.
Yeah, inshallah. I hope it's cathartic, and if it's not, then please forgive me in advance. I'm going to try to be tread as lightly and as sensitively as possible. So, I'm going to look to you for guidance on that. But let's take it in a different direction and do our, what we usually kick the podcast off with, which is asking a little bit about your momming story, whatever you're comfortable sharing about your kids, and your momming philosophy.
So I love talking about my kids. I love talking about my beloved late husband too. So I'm so excited to be here and have the opportunity to do so. Momming philosophy is an interesting one. So I'll start with the basics because that's an easier entry point for me. And that is I have a wonderful, amazing son, or we have, and his name is Khalil, and he's 15 years old, going into grade 11 in the Canadian school system. And my daughter is a vivacious 13-year-old going on 30. We're at the butting head stage already because we're so similar. And her name is Mila. And they are the apples of my eye. They are pure joy that drive me crazy every single day. But super helpful, super bright, super resilient. And it's such a privilege being, having a front row seat to their growth and their journey, which has had, you know, different peaks and valleys as everyone's journey has. And they've had an unfortunate, dip in theirs. But there's been a lot of growth and self-discovery and love and joy. And my son plays soccer. My daughter's a dancer. They're very active. And, my husband and I always had this joy de vivre. And that's something that was really important for us to be able to pass on. And that was seizing the moment, carpe diem in the moment, taking opportunities, trying new things. And so that's something we've tried to instill from a very young age, and they're embracing that. And that makes me really proud.
Yeah, they've internalized that example that you guys set for them. So that sounds wonderful. So tell us a little bit about your family background, and we love a good story on this podcast, a good
Yeah.
love story. So tell us how you met your husband and a little bit about him, whatever you're willing to share about him.
So I come from a minority Muslim background. I belong to the Shia Ismaili sect. It's a small sect. It's small in population, but it's deeply, deeply connected around the world with a lot of grassroots community events, volunteering, all of that. So we're very connected. You can spot an Ismaili, a mile away. Happened to me last night, gave a smile to a woman, and she was like, hey. And I'd never met her before, but there was like a spiritual connection there. And so that was really wonderful. Grew up in a very traditional home, very ritualistic, very religious. My parents attended Jamaat Khana Mosque daily up until COVID. That was just their way of life. And so we in turn also had to grow up with a very strict adherence to the faith and attending and participating. I met Ali, who is my husband, and the tenses get really odd, right? Because I still wear this, and it's just, He is like, I have one husband, and that's him. And I met him in the summer of 2000. I had previously met him through a mutual friend. So I knew him to say hello. And over the years, every time I'd bump into him, maybe once, twice a year, we had a hi-bye relationship, nothing more. And that morning of June the 1st, 2000, we bumped into each other on a major downtown street in downtown Toronto called King Street. And, he asked me how I was. And at that point, I had just returned from a glorious internship at CNN in Washington, D.C. And so he thought I had lived there. Like, he kind of knew where I was. And I said, no, I moved back. And I was at the point in my life where I had $0 and had accepted a job outside of the media field. I thought I was coming back. I was going to be the next, Wolf Blitzer. I was just, I was going to be on air, and I had all these aspirations, and I had to take a job in, an IT type of call center. That's the word I was looking for. And my aunt, and it was AT&T at the time, and I was just miserable. And he invited me, he showed me where the bake machine was, which I didn't have, access to, or I didn't know where it was. And he showed me where him and his colleagues ate, and also invited me to join him and his colleagues for lunch, which I did. And he made, I didn't make a single friend at that particular job, because even though we were in separate buildings, we were neighbors. And so we would see each other for breaks and lunch. And there blossomed this incredible friendship, just amazing. Like, we would try different restaurants every day. And soon it was becoming, after work, hanging out. And that's where our story began. And it blossomed and it blossomed, and he liked me for a very long time, and I didn't, and I gave him a hard time. And eventually we got engaged in 2002. I think my hesitation was that he was the real deal, and I was kind of nervous about that. And it wasn't necessarily a fiery, passionate love affair that, you romanticize and you see and hear about in books and movies. It was a calm love, and it was compassionate, and it grew and it grew and it grew. So it didn't start like it started friendship, and then it just became this connection that was on all levels. We just connected on so many levels and made each other better. We married in 2003. So I say our chapter together on this earth was 20 years, 20 amazing years. Of course, there was challenges along the way. We bickered, we fought, just like regular healthy couples do. But we called each other out, and we were both open to feedback and trying to improve and make ourselves better and make our relationship better. So I think we just had a really amazing marriage and partnership.
That sounds fantastic. And like you said, the bed of friendship is where it started. Like that's where the seeds were planted. And, it doesn't have to be all sparks and love at first sight and all that magical stuff that they lie about in the movies. Cause, I've never heard it described as calm love, but that is the one I think that just works when you're both going in, like just realistically not expecting anything. And here you go. So I love it.
I often hear about, when you make a choice or a decision,
Yeah.
and it wasn't necessarily just instinct or like your gut or your heart. I made a deliberate choice. I made a decision. I made a choice, a nervous choice, but I made the best choice I've ever made in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. Happiness is a choice. I tell people all the time. You just have to be willing to pull that trigger, and you did. And I'm so happy that you did despite your hesitation, because when it is the real deal, you're just like, women, I think, especially, like, we sabotage ourselves, right? It's like, I don't, what if this works? Well, yeah, what if it works?
We're always
It's
like,
going
what
to
if
work
it
for you.
doesn't? Well, what if it does? And it did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. So during the course of this courtship and marriage, did you end up going back to your original professional goals? And if you did, how do you think that prepared you, for what you had to face in the future?
I did eventually make myself back to the media space and started producing soon after that summer gig that took me out of the game. And it's been a very, I think, blessed career path where I've had opportunities behind the camera. I then moved into communications and PR, which journalists often call the dark side. And then I came full circle doing a PR media relations issue management for a news and media organization. So it's like I have my foot in not necessarily all the editorial decisions, but I'm still satiated with that curious news thing that's just part of my DNA. And then I can do the more strategic communications advice. I think there's been ebbs and flows as there are in career paths. I'm interested in a lot of different things. I like health. I like politics. I like, education. Those are fields that very much interest me. And I've been able to work on them as a producer of, television topics that I would pitch and then be able to research and produce. And you become like a mini expert for that time. Of course, you forget all the material, but at that time, you're really engrossed in it. And I think I just had like a really supportive partner who was like, go chase it. This is contract work. Oh, this is shift work. Go for it. And so he tried different things and he had his foot in different things. And so I think that energy from me was contagious, and he was able to just go outside the box that he was probably scared to do, because I was one that was willing to take risks. And so it's been an interesting professional trajectory as well. Alhamdulillah,
Yeah.
mashallah.
Alhamdulillah. That's awesome. Awesome. So, to the extent that you're comfortable, can we get into the circumstances that led to you now being a sole parent?
Absolutely. It was the summer of 2014, and Ali wasn't feeling well, and he'd gone to the doctor a couple of times, and it was weird because it was summertime and he was having trouble breathing, and it was that he had pneumonia or something. Got a couple of different antibiotics prescribed, and none of them were really working, and that's what led our glorious just angel on earth, our family doctor, to go and tell him to go and get a scan done at the hospital. And that was really tough. And he called me from the ER saying he was there. And soon after, he was diagnosed with a really rare, untreatable type of sarcoma. with the traditional treatments that you hear about when it comes to cancers, chemotherapy, radiation, they weren't on the table. They just weren't. It was just ineffective. There was one guy in Germany doing some kind of experimental surgery. Like, we searched the world, but it all led back to, we fortunately, alhamdulillah, have one of the best cancer care centers in the world, top 5, Princess Margaret. And so it led back to there. And there he was able to be a participant in 4 experimental studies and trials. And so there were, it's just different journey points. Some of it worked, some of it different, some of it had horrible side effects that were actually made the problem worse. I think a lot of the side effects actually were the bigger issue than the core issue. Throughout that period, Ali lived a good life. He wasn't necessarily open about it. He didn't look sick. I was mistaken as the patient twice in that journey when entering a room. Who's the patient? Because I often looked more tired than he did, and he just had good color. And, you know, there was a lot of like, this is it moments, right? We're nearing the end. And what would happen is we would get these bonus months, these bonus years. And the bonus years added up to 6 years. And so, you know, my daughter was 5 when he was diagnosed, and he passed when she was 10. So he got 5 more years. They got 5 more years together. And it was tough. There was a lot of checking off a bucket list. We went to Europe, and we passed on Rome because he had never had, you know, Italy, a pasta in Italy. We did so much.
Yeah.
But the pace was crazy. And it was unbelievable that he could keep up that pace despite having a stage 4 terminal illness.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, when I talk about carpe diem and living to the maximum every day, it sounds good in theory, but man, was it tiring. It was a tiring 6 years because we had this elephant in the room, but we were also just trying to pivot and focus on what we did have in the present and the now. So every trip was the last trip. Every amazing meal was the last meal. And so the bill started to add up too, because we weren't concerned with that necessarily because it could be the last. So we're not going to prohibit ourselves. But all of that sort of changed right around COVID. A couple months into the height of COVID, May 2020, is when Ali really started to decline in his health, like his breathing, and he needed a lot more assistance, and started to use a walker. And you could see it then, and he could feel it, and he was suffering. He was in a lot of pain, and that lasted a few months, and then his journey on this plane came to an end September 2020.
So that was really fast, like go, and then
the decline, the acute decline, or when I could really say he was sick throughout, but he put on such a good face, and he managed his illness. His direction to me was, you take care of yourself, you can take care of the kids, I got this. I didn't know his meds, I didn't go to all of his appointments. Like, it was a full-time job managing it, and he would do the research, he would do the calls, and he had these great relationships with our, you know, various doctors and specialists along the way, and even the pharmacist and him were become such good buddies. I became directly involved in that spring, because it can't take everything away, and nor did he need that support. He still did the groceries, he still did the laundry, because he had stopped working. So he needed to be a really present stay-at-home dad, which he was, and he was amazing at it. But yeah, the actual decline of when I could say he acted sick, he felt sick, it was hard to see him that way, were those months from May to September 2020.
Yeah. And, you know, this is during COVID. I think that was around lockdown time, wasn't it?
It was really tough. It was lockdown. The world had come to a complete halt. This idea of like, we got to go out and do it. And then we couldn't.
Go where? Yeah.
We were so restricted. And I think it became like we all collectively felt it. It was hard emotionally. It was depressing. It was isolating. And he already felt physically restricted. And I felt like it really compounded the issue because, we're supposed to wear masks. He had a hard time wearing a mask. He had, assistance with, with his breathing and a woman calling him out and saying he has to wear a mask. And he's like, oh, but there's exceptions. But we were just so tunnel visioned with the advice that we were getting, not considering people who actually can't breathe, can't put on a mask. Right. So it really made things awful. Like it was just a really shitty way for his ending to be, because we were forced inside and he hated inside and he wanted to be out. He wanted to be living those last few months. So we tried. He did. He would bust out of here and try to find those opportunities. And it was summer months. So at least there was, and whatever was open and whatever we could get into, we would do, even though it was really challenging physically.
Yeah.
But the routine scans, those appointments, because he wasn't acutely sick, it wasn't an emergency, we weren't privy to hospital privileges. So there was a lot of things that were missed as a result of COVID that had impact on his journey. And, the reality is he was very ill. I think we probably could have squeezed out maybe a little bit more time had we had those opportunities. But there was a lot of families that were impacted. There was a lot of cancers that went undiagnosed. And they got to such serious stages of their illness because we weren't having routine doctor's appointments anymore. So access was cut off. But yeah, it was right at the height of when things were just really strict and scary. We were scared as a community and as the world.
And certainly your family. So it kind of begs the question, like, it sounds like you were isolated and so was your community, but was there any attempts made by your community? Because, I actually grew up with a lot of Ismaili people around me in Houston. So I'm familiar with the community. It's very close knit. Were they able to do the job that they usually did, was just swarm around the family that needs them and elevate them? Or did COVID restrict that during this really hard period when Ali finally was symptomatic of his disease? What improvements, if any, could they have made, or did COVID just preclude all of that?
I think COVID was the huge factor in how much access there was. As you know, especially in Houston, it's such a tight-knit community, and not having access. And when I said at the beginning of this podcast, my parents attended from their very young age to their 70s every single day. So having that access cut off, having that home cut off was very difficult because we needed that. And we weren't, it was closed. It was locked down. And so there was a lot of attempts to have like these family prayer sessions where you could, do it online. A lot of, families would then expand, and in the height of it, there was a lot of people that were attending. Of course, prayer is individualistic, and it's about yourself. But when you do it as a collective, there's just so much power in that prayer, and I think that was missing. So the leaders of the community were good about keeping in touch, offering prayers, but it was over the phone. You're interrupting each other. And they would give a lot of du'as, and they would give, just all this support, but they were limited. They couldn't come and do a home visit, and they wanted to see him. And so everything was distanced. And I think what could they do differently? I mean, they were at the mercy of the healthcare system, which, was very strict, and they had to abide by that. And so, what sucked was, and I remember one of our PSWs, Gabriel, he was very young, and he was helping us out, and was such a good fit for Ali because he didn't want these old stereotypical support workers, nurses around him. It wasn't his vibe. And so you got this young guy, and he was a churchgoer, and he said, we can't sing our hymns. Like, we weren't allowed to sing. That was one of our restrictions, our health guidelines, or
Wow.
like offer prayer in unison. And this was a factor even in his funeral.
Oh, wow.
And so not hearing Salvat, not hearing that in unison at a funeral, which was limited to 30 people, which was also very challenging. In one way, it was great. It was intimate. It was his style. He wasn't a showboat. He didn't want extra attention on him. That's me. And so, in one way there was that. And if you think about his relationship back to God, it's not about the external. It's about him and his. But all of those prayers, I think people were doing at home, and that helped him rise. To be reunited with Allah and is his humble abode. And I think the community was really restricted. So any improvements that could have been made, it's so hard for me to say, because I did feel supported. They did what they could do. They showed up in the ways that they were allowed to. And despite it not being done in one room, I still believe that there was strength in numbers, and that the community was holding us close in their prayers, and they were reaching us. It just wasn't in a tangible way that we're used to feeling it. But I had to believe that, and I still believe that, because the alternative is just despair, and I can't go there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, what a sucky moment that, the community that is known for just being so cohesive, not physically being allowed to do what they do best. It breaks my heart, because, I just know that in my darkest period, my Masjid family came to my rescue. I didn't even see them. I really literally didn't even see them, but I knew they were always there. They were constantly taking care of my kids and my family so that I could do the job of taking care of the person that needed me at that moment. And it's the idea of them not being there and not showing up and not doing everything that they did. It just, like, I can't even imagine how I would have gotten through it. Like, to this day, like, there's so many faceless people that never took credit for the meals dropped off, or the field trips that they took my kids to, or the lunches they packed, or whatever they dropped off. And for all the prayers, like you said, that were made all over the world in chains and circles and all kinds of things. There's no way to ever say thank you for that. And there's no way to measure it. Distance, I think, still matters. Whatever is done at a distance still matters, but it's knowing that community that's close to your heart, that you used to see every day, somebody in your family is still seeing them every day and being lifted up during a really critical time. I think that's just priceless. And I'm so sorry that's, how during that crazy summer, you didn't have that physical. So,
but the community, like you said, and I forgot about meals and all the other things that were happening.
The
and
practical
it wasn't
stuff,
necessarily just the Ismaili Muslim community. I have a lot of friends that are Sunni. I have a lot of friends that are Jewish. I have all types of friends. And neighborhood, like, community was what was doing what they could. And whether that was these porch visits to me and supporting me, I had a really strong group of girlfriends that got together and created what was called Rish Squad. And it was a very practical group. It wasn't necessarily my besties from childhood who live abroad and all of that. I didn't need emotional stuff. I needed someone to clean my toilet. I needed someone to do. And so this was a practical group who was trying to put up a basketball hoop for my son. And I needed sand to, the weight. So someone who could go to Home Depot and do those things, someone who could bring these types of cookies, and so it was a group of 12 strong women that were doing practical things for me, and not at my request. I didn't want it. In fact, someone had suggested, oh, no, she needs a love bomb. She needs all these things. I was like, no, I do not need a love bomb. Like, I'm good. I need the practical things, it was hard to accept, but man, and that was made up of all types of women, but women who showed up. And that's really the essence of community.
That is. Do my laundry, get my groceries, pick my kids up, drop them off safely. Like that's all. Take them on a play date so they can get their mind off of things. That kind of practical help. Like we constantly encourage on the podcast, just show up and do it. You don't need to ask for permission. Just let them know, like, I'm taking your kid and I'll bring them back at this time. That's
Not
it.
what can I do?
Just do it.
Suggest I'm picking up a case of water for you.
Yeah.
I'll leave it outside.
Simple.
You can always do with a case of water, because as much as there were restrictions, and this is the ironic part, we had a lot of people coming through our house wanting to see Allie, wanting to see Sven.
Wow.
And none of them were getting COVID. It was so interesting, not just health professionals. And we weren't necessarily following the rules about I think the people that were coming in were very stringent.
Yeah.
They were not compromising. They were
put
not
Allie at risk. Yeah.
They were not going to put Allie at risk. So they were, I can't come, I have symptoms, or I don't feel right today. They would mask up, they would, sanitize, they would do all the protective stuff that they could to make sure that, and he didn't get COVID, and we didn't get COVID. So that was the irony, because at one point we had a lot more people than we should have, but that was because someone was dying that they loved, and he needed it and they needed it, and they needed to spend time together.
Yeah, absolutely. So during this process, especially because it was so fast, there were probably some critical decisions you had to make, as you could see kind of the writing on the wall for Allie this final time. Where were you able to go to get those questions answered, if at all?
Aside from the regular streams through the professional healthcare system that we have, which did an excellent job of outlining options and, this is what's going to happen, and preparing us, they had this bright yellow folder. In the bright yellow folder, we were given maybe a month before, and it's, at the top of it, do not call 911, right? And that was hard, right? Because it's like, I didn't want to open that bright yellow folder. I did familiarize myself with it, when things were just really going downhill. And your faith does waver, it gets compromised so many times throughout my life, and definitely through his illness. But I had to keep returning to it, and it got stronger and stauncher in one way, because that's all I could rely on was God, and questioning why him, why do the good people go? And it's true, the good people do take, like every example, always the best soldiers, because he needs them. He needs his soldiers up there. And so back to your question, I kind of lost my train of thought there, but there was a couple of seminars about end of life that was done specifically with Muslim scholars that I attended. One not so helpful, one was very theoretical, and they had grouped together different medical professionals, and then the scholarly one took more of a religious approach and stuff. But you know what? At the end of the day, there wasn't so much time to do that kind of reflection and research, because there are basic needs, and when you have kids too, they still needed to go to soccer, or they still needed meals, and they still needed comfort and laundry and so much. And I was working full time because I didn't know when the end was coming. And so I was very protective of unpaid leave, because that would take we would take a huge financial hit. So even though I had it, I protected it. And there's something in Canada called compassionate leave too. But once you get compassionate leave, it has implications for your life insurance with your employer and stuff. So there's all these nuances. So it's like, I can't really afford to take that time off. I will take off all my vacation. But I never actually got to, and there was so many times where like, let's just travel, like when things were really good in 2017, 2018. But then, we would not be getting 100% of my salary. And we were a one income family at that point. So there was these harsh financial realities. So I never actually took proper time off, like a leave. In retrospect, maybe if we'd crunched numbers differently, that could have been possible, but it was scary to do that. And it was like, I got this, I'm good, you know? And then I was working from home. And so, you know, I felt like I was physically more there, even though I was going in 10 different directions. And that's when we got full time help, paid help. That again was a huge financial burden, but I needed that second person rather than me taking time off because I couldn't handle all of the demands at once. We needed help.
Yeah. Yeah. Were there ever any like medical decisions that you had to make where you were concerned that, okay, what does this mean? Like Islamically, are we doing the right thing? Do we need to talk to somebody? Do we need to talk to the imam? Do we need to talk to somebody in leadership? Did that ever come up in the 6 years and especially that summer?
It did. It came up as we have a program called MAID, and that's, you know, they don't, assisted death, medical assisted death. And so that had been presented earlier on. No, just like when we're hypothetically talking about things and we would converse with our oncologist who was Muslim
Oh, good.
and
Okay.
a very devout Muslim too, very opinionated. Let's put that out there. He had a really grew up in Malaysia. He had some, you know, very strong sentiments about things. His kids go to an Islamic school. And so we would have these open conversations. And so yeah, you know, there's all these resources and stuff that always was presented. So that was given to us. And we struggled with that because that wasn't a route we necessarily wanted to take unless, you know, things just got unbearable. And it was an option on the table that we both considered. But in the end, we didn't have to go that route because Allah had made that choice for him. And I'm glad that it ended up that way because it was getting really bad. It was getting really painful. I knew when then he didn't have that enthusiasm to even just watch his favorite shows or couldn't eat anymore, but he still wanted the smell of like a good chicken wing or a beef rib or something. And all of that desire had gone away. And that's when I knew. And that was just like maybe 2 weeks, 1 week, a few days before. And it was that the enthusiasm for life, the zest for life that he had up until like a week before his death had gone. And that's how we both knew that time was coming because he was getting ready. Up until there, he was very resistant. He was very resistant. He didn't want it. He didn't want it. He wanted to stay despite the pain. He was like, I'll just keep going and we'll figure it out. If I have to be in a wheelchair, we'll figure it out. We'll get a van. So many people do it. But then towards the end, I think he was more ready. There was, you know, some spiritual awakenings, him feeling his parents who are both deceased. He was feeling them. There was, you know, a death doula that had come in and she was hearing things and feeling things. And there was energetically a change in the room, a nurse who saw me and took me on the porch just to give me a hug because she said his time was coming. So there was physical symptoms that were in the air, literally hanging in the air, but there was a feeling and an emotional and a spiritual sense that he was having, that I was having, that we were all having, that it might be imminent.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned spiritual crises along the way. How did you deal with them when they arose, and especially in that summer of 2020? Because I imagine, well, actually, in my head, it sounds like by 2020, that summer, your spiritual crises may have ended. But please correct me if I'm wrong and just kind of tell me how that looked for you.
Actually, there was a lot of acute things that happened. You know, he had such great willpower, such a smart guy, and so in charge of stuff. But because the pain was getting intolerable, some of the medications he was taking, these are opioids, these are narcotics. So there was a lot of psychological issues that started to come to play. there was hallucinations, there was anger, there was a lot of things that were so opposite of his personality that were happening. So despite all the challenges previously, they don't hold nothing against those few months where um, the meds changed him. And that was really hard. That was so challenging, because not only was he slipping away physically, I was losing him in another way. And I cried out for help, and I cried out for help to try to adjust things. And we would have conversations about, is this existential crisis that he's going through? Why is there mistrust? Why is there paranoia? Why are all these emotional? And it all led back to, at the end of the day, these are very serious drugs. And that patient is getting addicted to them. That patient is reliant on them. It was awful. It was awful. There was a lot of disharmony between us as a unit. And thank God the last 6 weeks was calmer. But there are things that are really painful to talk about, because there were so challenging and tested the faith, going, okay, we've already accepted that he's going to go. Or in one way, I'd accepted it. You never fully accept it, but come to terms with, but not this way. It can't be this way. It can't be him in this state, because that's not him. Such a soft-spoken gentleman, kind. And there was another side that was coming out of him that was not that. It was awful. And so, yes, damn straight, that faith got tested over and over and over again. And I almost want to erase that period, because it was just so painful. But I think it continues even post, right? There are moments, there are questions, but I kind of have like a tunnel vision with it. I try to take those other voices and the doubts and the all those negative thoughts that can take me down a really dark place away, and submit to Allah, believe in it. So it got stronger. Even in that time, I was like, this can't go this way. And we got back to a united front, and where we could see each other again in our true light, because there was these layers that were coming up that I had never experienced before. And a lot of things that were just not based in reality, but he thought it was real. Yeah. And my mental health was also, being compromised and questioned. And it was ironic. I was like, what? Like, I'm not the one here. It's, so there was just us both doubting each other. And faith is what carried us through. Yeah. Faith is what carried him to the finish line. Faith is what carried me, continues to carry me. I'm a believer. There's no way that there isn't divine design. There isn't the universe, whatever you want to call it, a higher power. For me, it's Allah. It has to be there. It has to be there. It's undeniable to me, because without that, the alternative is something I don't even want to discuss, because it's like dark and heavy, and there needs to be light. And where's that light coming from? There has to be reasons. There has to be guidance, and a higher power that's bringing us all together spiritually, connecting. I have an example earlier this week. I have a friend, and she was sending an email to a soccer coach, and her and Ali have probably corresponded maybe once or twice in her life. She was my friend. He knew her, and we would see each other sometimes, but she was my friend, a colleague turned friend. And she types in the letter A, and his email, from a job that was 15 years ago, shows up. And she tells me about it. And she said, truthfully, I hadn't thought about Ali in a while, but I froze. I thought about you. I thought about the kids. And I contact her this week out of the blue. She tells me that story. So there are uncanny connections, happenstances, serendipitous moments. And they
Yeah.
all intertwine our lives, me meeting you, me being here. There's reasons behind it. And for
Yeah.
me, I give it, I give it to the higher power above us.
Yeah. It makes things make sense for us. And then for me, it just to have a rare sarcoma, which is one of the most painful and debilitating types of cancers you can have, to have a rare sarcoma and live for 6 years after. I can't explain that outside of God,
Yeah.
and that's as a physician. So I can't. Um, During this whole period, you're also shielding your kids, I imagine. So what does that look like? Like preparing them, shielding them, whatever the correct word is. Please give me that vocabulary and tell me what it looked like for your family.
I think we were shielding us and trying in age appropriate terms to tell them daddy was sick. It wasn't something we could hide or shield. It was present.
Yeah.
Where are we going? There's an appointment. There was times when he would have to have an overnight stay, or all these side issues that I was telling about. And the heart issue came up, this other thing came up, and so many things would come up. And there was sometimes overnight stays. I would stay, or let's go see daddy. So they had been exposed to the hospital. They didn't like it. They had met the oncologist once or twice. They knew about appointments. Where are you going? Why is it going to take so long? Oh, he has to go in the machine. It's like, a cool thing where they see your body. So there was welcome home signs that we made. There was me feeling like we all had to sleep together certain nights. So trying at whatever stage they were just part of it. We were an open family. And so they were part of it. And we just tried to use terms and language that they could understand. And, tried to normalize it as much as possible. So it wasn't like they didn't know. They knew from the beginning that daddy was sick. What they understood to this day, I don't even think they understand it. Have they Googled what alveolar soft part tissue sarcoma is? It's a soft growing tissue that it probably had been growing for even decades before that. It's just that when it was found, it had already spread into areas of the lung and then later into the brain. But, I attended a session with this wonderful widow coach, Heather Queasel, and she was talking about the frontal lobe and the frontal lobe cortex and its development and how it's not even fully developed until your early 20s. So you can't grasp it. 25, right? Mm-hmm. And so they can't process, they can't emotionally grasp some of that. And so it's still going to be a huge journey ahead of them. They still have a decade of that. Because it's not something they really are comfortable talking about. And sometimes I feel guilty or bothered by that or sad about that because I feel like I'm grieving for them, I'm grieving for myself, and I'm grieving for Ali. Like sometimes I just, I wish you were here. I wish you could see he scored. He scored and he runs like you. But then I'm like, he did see that. He has the vantage point. In fact, admittedly, I'm driving Ali's, coveted bucket list car, a Tesla, a second Tesla, and I'm trying to protect it because it's his baby. And he, I've banged it a couple times from the side, and I always like go like this because I'm like, oh no, he saw
Don't
it.
yell at me.
It's not like me previously would have had these little fender bender things. They're always like little minor scratches and things in parking lots. It's not that I'm not a good driver. I'm not a good parker, even though I have I have a car who can, can do it for me. And so there's incidents in our marriage where I've had to, come home in shame or call him in shame and say, I hit the car,
Whoopsie.
Whatever car we had. And he'd always give me a lecture and he'd always be disappointed. He was kind and compassionate, but he was just like, what's wrong with you? Pay attention. You got to do it this way. And, so we that was definitely a developmental area of mine. In fact, in the last couple of days of his life, he even talked to me about my
Don't
driving.
wreck the cars.
Talked to me about, he talked to me about me leaving lint in the dryer. Like there was like practical, funny things that he was telling me about, and he worried about me driving because now I'm responsible for the two kids. And he was such a good driver, like cleanest record, never an accident. And I always had these little moments. So the first time I banged the Tesla out of the garage, our own garage,
Oh dear.
ridiculous. Anyways, I went like this. I'm sorry. And then it happened again another time. And I'm like, you can see it all. There's no hiding.
Yeah.
There's no like,
No.
hi, I have something to tell you. Don't go mad. Like, so when my son is playing so well, his soccer skills have just improved so much. And Ali was a great sportsman, played all types of sports, never in organized ways, but was just so athletic. He grew up in an era where you just pick up a ball and you just do it. And he was a great baseball player and a great soccer player, but ultimate golf player. And he was doing it before all the other brown guys were doing it. He was there. He was there. He was there in like 1999 when I met him, when he was on that golf course. So super passionate about it. So his car, his golf clubs, there are certain material things I need to protect. Everything else doesn't matter, but those things. And, so it's grieving for him. It's grieving for the kids. And they're not there yet. And me having to accept that, there's 3 reasons. 1, they're uncomfortable and they don't want to talk about these topics because it's awkward. And that's children. Number 2, this physiological reason. There's science behind it.
They can't process it yet.
And 3rd, they live in the present. They're not really focused on yesterday or tomorrow. Maybe a little bit of tomorrow, like what are we doing? Are we going to the beach? But they're focused on the present. They're not thinking about their high school graduations, which I do. They're not thinking about all these milestones ahead of them that kills me, right? But it has to be that he's there and that he's keeping them on track. And subhanAllah, they're doing fine. Like, they have friends, they do well in school, they're active, they eat well. All the basic things are being checked off. And I have to feel that there is guidance coming from not only the Almighty, but also from this other angel that they have, right? That's looking out for them. Sometimes I don't feel him and I worry about that. I'm like, oh yeah, he's busy because he's got the kids to take care of. So it's been not shielding, and I wouldn't advise to shield. I'd find resources and ways to be able to introduce it. And that leads to a book I wrote, which is really introducing the concept of death in a child-friendly way. It's not a scary book. It's just a book. I was starting to market it by saying it's a book you need on your bookshelf because every family, it's going to be a neighbor, it's going to be a friend, it's going to be a grandparent, it's going to be a parent, is going to experience death. And that's just the reality. We hate talking about it, and it's uncomfortable. Look, I've written a book about it, and I'm still sometimes uncomfortable about it. But now I've shifted from, it's not just a book that you pull out on a special occasion or when you need it as a resource. It's a book that can just be part of your repertoire. I mean, there's just books that sit there. So just you open it up, you look at the pictures, maybe you understand a word or two, depending on your age, maybe you read a sentence, but it's just part of your regular rotation of books. Because the other rotation of books are also dealing with different topics, and it could be about a bunny who got lost, and it could be about whatever. It's just another book. It's another book with beautiful illustrations. And maybe when you need it, then you remember that that's part of your rotation because it's already been introduced as a regular book, not as a special book. Because originally it was this special book, reserve it, keep it there as a resource for educators, for teachers, for parents. And now I kind of, thinking about it differently with someone else that pointed it out and said, it was an educator and said, no, just make this part of your library.
Home library. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for introducing the book because I couldn't even ask the question.
So it's
'Cause I'm
called The
thinking
Stars
about,
That Shine for You.
yes,
And
thank you.
ultimately, the universal message is that in this, it's not looking at religions, it's not looking at different, it's looking at different cultures and customs. And so there's a really interesting appendix that describes what's happening in the pictures. And so what
Okay.
unites us, there's food, there's film, there's music, and then there's death is another topic. There's so many topics that
Yep.
unite us. And so here's another one. And on some level, spiritually, I think we can all agree that there are stars above us. Well, there are stars above us. That's fact.
Literally. Yes.
And we all have special stars. And we will continue to have special stars. And these special stars, if you believe in them, they can shine really bright and they're looking out for you. And so that's really the universal message, that if you've lost someone, or even if you haven't, look up into the stars. And in Coldplay's words, look how they shine for you.
Yeah. The Coldplay reference. That's awesome. So was this book a part of your healing after Ali passed, or was it for the kids? Did you anticipate, like, hey, these milestones are going to come and maybe they're going to feel it then, that Ali's not physically here and I'm going to have to hold space for them. I'm going to start by writing this book to prepare them, or was it more for you? Like, this is how I'm going to deal with his loss.
Good question. I think a bit of both. The book skews younger than my children, but I think it's also universal. Like, I think it's good for parents too. But I realized that there wasn't enough, and there is, like, once you go in and write in a space and you find all these other books, there is, but
Yeah.
there's room for all of us, right? There's room for more.
Right.
And so there doesn't just have to be one grief book by Maria Shriver, which is, I forgot the title, but there's another one, Invisible String. There's some famous ones, but
Sure.
and so this one, my mission through my first book, Sushi and Samosas, my second book, The Stars That Shine for You, and future books, is to celebrate diversity within children's literature. So that's the primary
Perfect.
objective, and looking at
Yeah.
different cultures and what binds us together. And so there's different stories to tell. And so this one just dealt with grief and loss, but also
Yeah.
hope. And so it just came to me. I think it's good for the children. It was definitely part of my process and healing, but there was a point where I just didn't even want to talk about the book. Like, it was just, oh God, am I really gonna, is this really gonna come out to the world? Because it was great to write it, and then felt reconnected with it when I saw it come, like when I saw the physical copy. And then I was like, oh, this is a good thing, because I'd sort of lost my enthusiasm. It took a lot longer
Sure.
than I anticipated as a project. So from like a work perspective, it just wasn't as exciting anymore.
Yeah.
But now that I've reconnected with it in a physical way, I should have a copy here. I have a copy.
Yeah,
Yes,
let's
I have a
take a look.
copy. Yeah, I have a copy here. And this is a scene in Hawaii. So when a fellow surfer dies, they have a ceremony called a paddle out, and they all paddle out and acknowledge their bra, who's So, and they all ride the waves and they do a paddle
Oh,
out.
wow.
And there is there's a Tibetan custom. There is. This is interesting. So the windows, it's a little bit dark, but the windows are open in this page, and it's
To
a
let
little
the
boy
soul
who's
out.
thinking of his neighbor. Now, this is a tradition in Denmark where you open the windows. You open the windows so the soul can be released, fresh air come in, and there's a whole custom around that. Sorry about the dog. New Orleans has something
Yeah.
that's fascinating, a jazz funeral, right? Like,
Oh.
they literally have a jazz procession that's in New Orleans. And there's so many different customs and traditions that happen around the world. This, some cultures, this one is specifically like Bangladesh, and again, diversity, and there's a lot of disclaimers because not everybody, and
Not everybody. Yeah.
not everybody in that particular country would identify with this. But there are groups in Bangladesh that would shave their head. This boy is honoring his deceased uncle, who's like this Joker guy, and he shaved his head in honor of that.
Mm.
So there's just different images that are caught in the book. This is a Persian grandpa, and he just loved halwa and sweet desserts. And then you go to the about the book, and it explains what happened in all those pages, or what are those pages really talking about, because it's a unique approach. It's a poetic approach. It's not like a
heavy.
It's not heavy. It's not like in Bangladesh, some families do this.
Yeah.
And so this is indigenous communities, which could be Australia, Canada, wherever they belong to every native land. And they're honoring their fierce elder who had a special twinkle in his eye, a clever man who taught them to be brave, honest, and to always respect the earth. And, and it's, every few pages, there's a little bit of a refrain about look up at the sky and see how the stars glow, glitter, and sparkle just for you. And so it's the stars that really binds the book together, and I think binds us together as well as communities.
And gives hope.
Yes, it gives us hope.
Yeah, gives hope. So thank you for this very heavy topic and sharing, Allie, with us. Sharing your experience with your kids with us, because I know it wasn't easy for you. As you can see, it wasn't easy for me. And this is like the work that I do every day. So it doesn't get easy. Like you said, it comes before the recording. I think you said it comes in waves, and you never know what's going to set you off. But it is cathartic. Talking about it is helpful. And for those people who continue to believe that death and dying is not something that they need to talk about or get ready about right now with their kids, I think you do. Because, to your point, Rishma, like all of us are going to experience it. Our kids are going to experience it in some way, whether they're witnessing it. And, sadly, we've had some moms on who have lost a child. We've had moms on who've lost a partner, parents. So it's really important for us to, like you said, have the repertoire ready at hand in our library, looking at the show notes. Of course, the link to your beautiful book is going to be in our show notes, but also coping with death and dying. I think a guide by Yaqeen Institute is in there. There's some reading for the rites of death, RITES, and the RIGHTS. I thought it was really interesting that you mentioned the death doula, because we just had an episode with the death doula, a Muslim death doula as well. And so all of these things that we may not know that are out there as resources until it's quote unquote too late. Maybe you won't bank on something that could have made it easier for you, like your book, like a death doula, like a community member who maybe is experienced in the dying process and can step in and answer some of those critical questions that you have at end of life. Is it medication? Is it medical condition? Is it just personality? Is it just me? And kind of clearing that mud for you. So I encourage everybody to look into the show notes. They're available on our website. There's a separate tab. We're going to put in your Instagram on our show notes too. So if you give license, then a lot of our audience members do go ahead and contact our guests sometimes if they're going through something, experiencing something, or have further questions. So if you're open to that, we will share your Instagram, and we're always available at salam@mommyingwhilemuslim.com if you have any further questions or needs, and we will direct you to the correct resources if we don't know, and then we will help you if we do. Any final thoughts or any words that you want to share, Rishma?
Just really enjoyed this conversation. You're so solid and articulate, and I will take any opportunity to talk about Ali. And so I so appreciate when people want to talk about him, and so many people just feel like, oh, it's going to be uncomfortable. It's like, no, of course I want to talk about him. He's my favorite person. And I think, we've come a long way in discussions around, let's talk about LGBTQ, let's talk about mental health. These were all like taboo subjects that we didn't touch. And now we're finding terms and languages, and it's becoming part of the everyday conversation. And so there's
Yeah.
so many other topics. So I think grief and loss is just another one that we need to become more literate about. So just
Right.
because we didn't in the past doesn't mean that there isn't room for the change. And that's why we can prepare the next generation. It's just another topic, and we need to be literate in all of these topics.
Yeah.
And we made such strides with mental health, right? Like that was so taboo. You don't talk about that,
Never.
right? Never. And you never talk about death, and it's private and it's uncomfortable and it's so sad, and it is, and it's tough, but we need to talk about it. And
I
so
think it's so
this
that
was a
people don't
good
feel alone.
space. Yeah. And we just feel like we're all facing it together. Right. And just like mental health, like every family has someone who is, has had dealt with some kind of anxiety or depression, or family member that's suffering. And it's just, it's part of health, overall health.
Mm-hmm.
This is just part of overall life,
Yeah,
and so
absolutely.
we just need to get more comfortable with it. So thank you for creating the space for us to get comfortable ourselves, and also equip others to get comfortable, and hopefully for them to then pass it on as well. So we can just keep growing the conversation, so we can all become better literate with grief and loss.
Yeah. And as a result, better moms and inshallah better Muslims. May Allah grant Ali the highest ranks in Jannah and reunite you in love, comfort, and peace, inshallah. Ameen, when the time is right. So jazakallah khair for sharing that beautiful story with us. May your love story just continue and grow and flourish.
Oh, that makes me so happy. You don't understand. It's a story that has different chapters. We're just in a different chapter. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Rishma, sorry. I'm like mixing up names now because all I want to do is like blow my nose. All right.
We did well. We did well. We did well.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you.
No snotting. Perfect. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Owning your perfect home? Don't let myths and misconceptions hold you back from achieving your dream home. Join our national partners, Guidance Residential, as they discuss Islamic home finance and debunk all the doubts. Register now and let Guidance guide you towards achieving your dream home without compromising your faith. Register for free at gr.link/NCW-partner-MWM-August 23rd.